Hello, my name's Tom Walker. Welcome to That'll Be the Day, which is the relatively new name of my podcast. And this one could be controversial. Before we start, if you like the music at the top of the podcast, it's a track called That'll Be the Day by the Liverpool band The Vow. And I'll be playing that in its entirety at the end of this conversation. Now, if there's one subject that divides views among visually impaired people, it's the Guide Dogs charity. Some people argue that they do a great job and are hugely appreciative of the work they do. Others, however, are concerned that the charity is moving away from its core focus, namely to provide guide dogs to blind people. As I don't have a guide dog myself, despite what some people may think, I don't have a strong opinion on the charity. But one man who does is Paul Gough Hopkins from Birmingham, who until recently had a dog called Usher. And if you're able to see, the picture on this podcast is of Paul with his guide dog. The other thing I should say right from the outset is I will be asking the Guide Dogs charity whether they want to take part in this podcast. Okay, after all that, hopefully on the other end of this Zoom call is Paul from Birmingham. Paul, hope you're there.
I hope so. Hi.
Happy days. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm good, thank you. Are you?
Not too bad. How's the lockdown been for you?
I'm all right. I was just thinking it's the first time you've had a brummie, isn't it, on the podcast?
It is. And also, coincidentally, you're a partner of Claire, who was the immediate previous interviewee.
Indeed. Yeah, that's weird how that's worked out, but definitely a coincidence. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. How have you found lockdown?
To be such. Yeah, how have I found lockdown? It's been tough. I mean, I've not seen Claire for about 9 months of this year so far. So it's between when lockdown started, the first lockdown, you know, and now. So I saw her a bit during the summer and literally having to sort of stay in the garden for a lot of the time. And then eventually got into the house at some point, and then saw her again over Christmas. So between September and about Christmas time, then I saw her over Christmas for a couple of weeks. So now we're into, what is it, lockdown 3 or 4. So yeah, it's been tough, but not terrible in the sense that I've had a keyboard to play with and stuff, and I've made my room a bit more bomb-proof in terms of, well, if I've got to live in here most of the time, I might as well make the most of it. And this would be my shared house that I'm in Birmingham.
And you've been going into work, haven't you, as well?
Yeah, so I've been in work all during lockdown. I feel slightly a little bit humble, too humble to sort of say that my work is a key work position when you think of sort of NHS staff and all that. But I guess it is because I produce accessible information. So it's financial information, insurance, utility stuff, all the kind of information that we as visually impaired people still need in a timely manner. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. And walking to and from work.
And until recently, you'd have been doing that walk with Usher. Tell me about your dog.
So Usher was just everyone's friend, really. He was completely like appropriate, you know. He was such a lovely dog. So I've had him. He died in July. He suddenly got ill, just literally on the morning, just wasn't himself. And you always know when your dog's not well when they don't eat their food, and he wasn't eating his food. Took him outside, and he didn't really do very much, and was very just slovenly, really, just couldn't hardly move around and stuff. So I got my friend to come down, who's sighted, someone from work, who was in my little bubble at work because we're doing split shifts because of COVID. And she came down and she said, "Oh yeah, you know, let's take him to the vet." Vet said, "Yeah, we'll give him some blood, do some bloods, do some checks, but he seems okay." Then he got out her car and sort of tripped a little bit, and he's never ever done that. He's so sure-footed, or was so sure-footed. Anyway, I took him. He got worse during the day, just laid down all day, and by the time we came to leave for the evening on the Thursday, he couldn't walk. Like, he couldn't even stand up. He managed to walk from one room to the other, and then just literally laid back down again. And then me and my manager and I ended up carrying him down to the car. And sadly, you know, they did a scan on him and found that he'd had obviously a malignant lump or cancerous thing that had been going on for a while, I would imagine, but he showed no symptoms whatsoever. And it turned out then the only choice really was to say goodbye to him. And, you know,
that's very sad. since July, you've been having to do the 2-mile walk to work on white cane power.
Yeah,
how's that worked for you?
So it's 2 miles each way. So, just for those that are talking about exercise, I'm getting plenty of 2 miles each way. It was a struggle. So the day that on the morning, on the morning after Usher had died, I had to go up to work to get a cane and everything, and just jump in. I thought if I don't do that, then come Tuesday I won't want to walk back into work, and it'll be a real struggle. So I made myself do it, and it immediately the weight of the world felt like it had dropped onto my shoulders, and it doesn't really go away. And as I said, I think I was a cane user for 30 years, so it's not like I'm a novice cane user anyway. But to have a dog that you are reliant on, and of course I use my cane, and a lot of people don't, but I did pick up my cane every so often and use it, because you should keep your cane skills up, so I'm definitely towing that line. I did, but it was still a real struggle. And night, of course, then it became winter, and we've got all the night blindness, which I suffer terribly from. My eyesight is never ever stable. Whatever light you've got, I suffer from it. So it's I'm a difficult customer to please in terms of trying to make the most of my youthful sight.
I know that feeling. I'm exactly
sure.
the same.
I'm sure what you do. There's a smile on your face there. Yeah.
Yes, just a little bit. Yeah, I'm fully empathising there.
Yeah,
let me tell you. I know that feeling. And while you had Usher, I think it's important to point out, you did a lot of work for Guide Dogs, the charity, didn't you?
We're on the same campus as Guide Dogs where I work. So, I mean, I've done bits of work with them in the past, particularly when I first had Usher. But it's more latterly, it was more the sort of the fundraising really that I did for them, really in memory of Usher, I guess. I don't know how much of that story you want me to tell, but I mean, it's really, people were so generous. What we wanted to do basically was raise £2,500 so that we could name a guide dog puppy, and you can get to name a male and a female. So, they'll choose between one or the other of the names. So you don't do both, but yeah. So I was going to have obviously Usher, and I know there are other Ushers around, but that's okay. But then the other one I wanted was Lola, because my late brother, his dog's still alive, but Ian unfortunately died just before the first lockdown. So a lot of the money came from his funeral donations.
The charity was an organisation which you would have felt very positive about, but subsequently your feelings have started to change. Perhaps you could explain what's happened. I know that, for instance, there's an issue now with how long you'll be on the waiting list.
I would describe myself, I think, as a critical friend, really, and I think I've earned that place. I'm very much for guide dogs and remain so. I think the day Usher, the morning after Usher died, obviously I was in touch with the dog welfare people, basically, because they're the ones that you wouldn't immediately need to speak to because of what happens with the dog and stuff afterwards, like whether you have the ashes or not and all that, which I didn't want to do. So that was that. But obviously they were took great care to make sure that I was okay, and really, really supportive. And then said, well, of course, you'll be a priority because you work and you commute, because obviously I commute between London and Birmingham in ordinary times, granted, but nevertheless, you get my point. And so, priority one, and all the trappings of whatever that meant. And I didn't think it was like you're going to have a dog straight away because of the pandemic and stuff. But then it took nearly 3 months to get towards even having an assessment, and that only happened because I really pushed it and played my face, to use a Brummie term, which basically means had a bit of a moan. And they then did the assessment. So you can't go on the waiting list until you've had these assessments. So if you're waiting 3, 4, 5, 6 months or more for the assessments, then you're not on any official list. So therefore, that waiting list still stands for, until you get on it, you're not officially waiting. So I thought, well, I'm not having that if I'm meant to be a priority. So at least get the assessments done. So that was all well and good. They got finished in October. I opted for a 3-monthly update. And then that was when, so they phoned me up on the Saturday, just gone and said, oh, well, from now on, you have to be on the list a minimum of a year before you'll even be considered. So a year is going to have to pass before you're even going to get considered for a dog.
So effectively, it can take up to what, 3 months to have the assessment before you're on the waiting list, and then once you're on the waiting list, you've now been told it will take a year.
At least, so a minimum of a year before they'll even touch my application again now.
Why is that? What have they said? What explanation have you had?
Well, of course they're going to say pandemic, and to some extent, I think that's fair. And to really, in light of that, I was going to leave it. I was going to say, well, okay, fair enough, and I didn't. I thought I was annoyed about it and upset because I said, well, really, that's a notional. We're now, Usher died in July. We're talking about January, and now you're telling me that I'm not even a priority anymore. And I said, well, what happens if you get a dog that would suit my needs more than anyone else's? And it was like, well, no, there will be someone that will be in a similar position to you, and they'll get the dog first because they'll have been waiting for longer than a year, which is completely. It sounds arbitrary to me, if I'm being honest, but I just think I feel sore about it, I suppose, because I no longer feel that I'm a priority. As I said, I wouldn't have really worried so much about that. That was for me to deal with. But then I'm starting to see a lot more refocusing of guide dogs campaigns towards stuff that really isn't to do with guide dogs. So they've been, as a core element of what they do. Now, I know they've always done other things, but it's the focus is really heavily now, it seems, on everything I'm seeing on Facebook and Twitter and whatever is about funding for helping children at schools and stuff, and no one wants children not to be helped at schools, but I just see that as a crossover with stuff that people like RNIB do, and it seems to me that there's a mixing of messages, and more importantly that there's a massive movement away from what I can see of the core objectives.
Well, I'm going to ask guide dogs whether they want to contribute to this podcast.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing they would say that we all live in challenging times, and certainly charities do, and that they, like everybody else, needs to diversify to stay alive, if you like, to continue operating. What would you say to that?
I am speaking primarily about my own experience, but when I asked the question, because I was so shocked at what happened, I asked on an unofficial group that I run around guide dogs, which again has been very supportive of guide dogs. It's a very mixed bag of people, but 1,500 odd people on that group, and many comments really saying the same sort of thing, that they feel that the focus has changed, and that they've been waiting a lot longer than I have so far, and they're quoting sort of 3 years plus. So actually these problems already existed before the pandemic.
When you say that guide dogs have lost their focus, what do you think they've moved their focus onto?
For me and for many, I think it's definitely away from the core sort of training guide dogs and all that entails, and more towards children's services. Buddy dogs definitely is a big thing now, and I'm also hearing that, and you can ask guide dogs to clarify this, or we, but that people that in some circumstances they won't give buddy dogs to people that are visually impaired unless they've got sighted help to have them. So again, it's me. I don't know if that's because maybe they're looking at people with additional disabilities, learning difficulties, where that might be fair enough, but certainly their messages aren't saying that exactly. They're leaving it open to interpretation, really, and it's quite easy to do that because there isn't any other place to go with it. I get that there's mobility things around guide dogs as a core thing, so obviously you would expect them to maybe come to me and say, well, we could do long cane training or whatever. But when I spoke to them, they said to me on Saturday, well, you could potentially get some help from us. Let us know if you need any help with your cane or whatever. But then said, but we probably won't be able to do very much about it. So I was like, well, what are you? And again, this is from one member of staff. So, but I think if you're going to call someone and deliver the kind of news that you are, then I am politely going to say, look, thanks for your call and thanks for all you're doing. And yes, I understand that the pandemic is difficult. But then when you reflect on it afterwards, you think, well, I've been told quite a lot of things there that don't really make a lot of sense, and they certainly don't allude to your core objectives.
From your point of view, Paul, for somebody like you, who had a guide dog for 7 years, do you think there should be a separate process for people like you when you're applying for a replacement dog?
I think I almost thought there was. Certainly, I didn't mind going through the process as long as that's done fairly quickly, and as long as the parts of the assessment are done in a timely manner once the first thing starts.
And I guess you've had the 7 years with the guide dog, so although you've kept up your cane skills, you are to an extent dependent on him to help you get from A to B.
Yeah, to suddenly be without your dog and then trying to navigate with all the sounds. I mean, it was weird. The world just suddenly turned up the volume. It was the strangest thing. So again, for me, it's a very mixed bag, and I feel almost guilty sort of being critical of them. But I think the time has come for them to answer some questions, really, and I'm sure that I won't be the only person asking them.
Paul Gough Hopkins, thanks very much indeed. And as I said, I will be asking guide dogs whether they want to take part. I said earlier I was going to invite somebody from the Guide Dogs charity on. And the really good news is that Pete Osborne, who's the Director of Operations, has stepped up to the wicket. I'm really pleased about that. Pete, how are you?
I'm very good, sir. Very good indeed.
Fantastic.
Coping with all this fun in lockdown, as we all are.
Me too. I ought to just say that I've known Pete for many years from Worcester College for the Blind, and subsequently I think we may have even caroused the odd pint or two together over the years.
think we may have done, possibly the odd 1 or 10.
Yes. Yeah. So just for the purposes of transparency, people know that we know each other. That's good. Pete, Paul Gough Hopkins is, I think, generally regarded as a fairly mild-mannered character, and he's made some comments about guide dogs which are fairly critical on Facebook, and quite a few people chimed in behind him. I think the 2 points Paul was making were firstly that he's been told he's got to wait for a year for a replacement guide dog, and secondly about the alleged lack of focus in the charity. Perhaps if we could take them in that order. Paul very sadly lost his dog in July. He then underwent an assessment for a dog, and then was told, I believe, a few days ago that he's going to have to wait for a year at least before he's considered. What is your sort of considered response to that?
Yeah, well, I'm a guide dog owner myself, so I have kind of the almost a dual focus on this, both as the person ultimately responsible for how we deliver all of our services, but also, I come at it from a perspective of a guide dog owner myself. And being without a dog is horrendous. It's I've experienced it. It's very difficult, to really get out and about in the same way that you otherwise would, and your mobility is impacted enormously. But also the support that the emotional support that you get from your dog is also no longer there. It's in every sense almost a form of bereavement, and I absolutely understand that personally. So it's not something we ever want to see happen. The position we're in at the minute is that the various lockdowns and the whole pandemic has had a huge impact on how we deliver our services. So to give you a flavour of that, last year we expected to match around 700 people with a guide dog, and we actually managed around 300. So the implications are enormous, and we just were not able to conduct training safely. So obviously our aim is to make sure our staff, our service users and our volunteers are safe as far as is possible. And actually, if you think about how guide dogs are trained, and how we train people with guide dogs, you're almost inevitably coming inside that 2 meter bubble. There are all sorts of instances, where you're going to need to physically show someone, how things need to be done, etc., etc. So that became really difficult for us last year and continues to be very difficult for us now. So, it's been a real challenge for us to even, keep up with the number of dogs that are retiring or who sadly die while they work. I've experienced that as well. My last dog, she died while she was still working. So I know that happens to people as well. So it is a massive challenge for us. We're facing very significant challenges, getting our services back on their feet, and this is resulting in longer wait times for people.
Paul has been told, though, that he will have to wait a year regardless, even if a suitable dog were to become available in that sort of intervening period.
Yeah, I don't think that should be the case. What we're actually doing at the moment is prioritizing finding dogs, replacement dogs, if you like. So it would be the case potentially for someone who's newly applying for a guide dog that they may need to wait longer than someone who's waiting for a replacement dog. But we're always looking for the right dogs for the right people. And that process goes on across all of the teams. So I wouldn't expect someone to get that message that they would need to wait for a year before anything happens.
I've known quite a few guide dog owners over the years. Never had one myself, much as I love dogs. But the one complaint that I pick up on a fairly regular basis, the lockdown notwithstanding, is that there doesn't appear to be a process for replacing dogs quickly. So Mr. Jones or Mrs. Smith loses their dog in whatever month in July, and there doesn't appear to be a ready-made dog available for that person within a couple of months. The process can take an awful lot longer. Why is that, and what can you do to maybe speed things up?
Yeah, I think it is the case, sadly, that there's quite often a long delay, and that's partly because of the matching process. So it's not really possible to almost like take a ready built dog off the peg and match it with absolutely everybody. There are specific characteristics that people will have. So it could be that you walk particularly fast and you have very strong vocal control, and you're able to you've got a lot of experience with your dog. Equally, it could be that you walk very slowly. Maybe you're not able to walk in quite so far. People are very individual, and that you don't necessarily need access to, for example, escalators and undergrounds and all of those things. So the characteristics we take into account are huge and variable. And one of the things I think we do need to do moving forward is increasingly standardize that, so that there is a standard set of characteristics that we will initially focus on, and we prepare our dogs increasingly to those characteristics. And then we look to actually almost adapt dogs to specific circumstances. So if somebody has a hearing impairment and maybe needs additional, the dog will need to provide additional support, or someone has limited mobility or some other factor that we need to take into account. We almost try and do that later on in the process and build on a standard approach. The other thing that we are doing a lot of, and we're really good position to do this, is invest in more resources to train more people. We've got the strategic objective of delivering 1,000 partnerships within this current strategic period, and that's very much where we still are. We want to get ourselves to a place we are recruiting tens of trainees. We did that last year. We will do that this year. We have a project to completely rethink how we train, recruit and develop and train technical staff, so that we can actually get ourselves to that place, but also beyond. Let's build a really strong position from which we can kind of move forward, so that we've got a much greater number of partnerships coming through.
This may be the type of question that somebody who's never owned a guide dog would ask. So apologies for that. But I've always wondered why the matching process doesn't begin earlier. So, for example, if a guide dog reaches the age of 8, why then automatically that guide dog owner doesn't begin the process of being matched with another dog?
It's a really good question. I mean, we don't have a standard retirement age for our guide dogs. There's some, suggestion, and indeed amongst some of our staff, that we maybe should have a standard retirement age. But just as there isn't a standard retirement age, or there isn't an absolute retirement age for people, there isn't for dogs. And what can happen in a sense is that some dogs will work quite happily until they're 11 or beyond. I was speaking to somebody recently who's adapted how they work their dog, so there's not as much work for the dog to do, but the dog is 12 and a half and very happy and doing those routes, probably for not very much longer. But equally, someone's dog who's working in a particularly busy, strong environment might retire earlier. So actually there isn't really an easy point at which you can start the conversation. Having said that, what we do is when dogs reach 9 years old, we have more regular conversations with people about the potential of your dog retiring and what might come next. And we begin to talk to people, have conversations with them about what, if anything, has changed for them. So although we're not kind of formally reassessing people at that stage, we are actually building a picture of what might be required so that when we do come to the reassessment, we've got all that information we can rely on.
Moving on then to the sort of the alleged sort of moving of the focus of the charity. I was watching the television, I think it was yesterday morning, and I saw an advert, a Guide Dogs advert talking about helping young people. And this appears to have certainly upset one or two people, judging by the comments on Facebook. What would your response be to the accusation that the Guide Dogs charity is losing its focus by concentrating on young people and apparently at least moving away from dogs?
Yeah, I'm glad you said apparently, because there's no suggestion that we would do that. Our canine services, and we've got more coming on stream. We have the buddy dog service for children, young people that we've basically relaunched, and we placed over 50 of those dogs last year. And we're equally working on a companion dog service for older people, where people might need the emotional support and benefit from the emotional support that a dog can bring, but they don't necessarily need them for guiding purposes. So our dogs remain core and central to what we do. And actually, in terms of the resources that the organisation has available and deploys, the vast amount of resource goes to supporting the guide dog service, and indeed the investment does as well. So our capital investment in our buildings and developing, the staff that we need to carry out even more new partnerships than we are at the moment. I think, though, it's important to reflect that the objects of the organisation are really based around supporting people with sight loss to live actively, independently and well. And there is more that the organisation can do in addition to the guide dog service while not detracting from that service.
When I run the odd training course for student journalists, I always tell them not to ask double-barrel questions, but I'm just about to do it. So apologies to anybody.
That's fine.
Apologies to anybody listening. Can you understand the anxiety that some guide dog owners think? And also, perhaps you could lead us into future thinking for the charity.
I absolutely understand the anxiety that people are experiencing. I've experienced it myself, and one of the things I quite often bring to our conversations is my personal perspective on just what it's like not to have a dog, and for that option to not be available to you when you've experienced it and got used to it. So I absolutely do understand it. I think in terms of the future, there's a strong drive to make sure that we do even more for more people, that we grow our services, the guide dog service included, and the senior management team, of which I'm a part, and our board, our trustees, are absolutely focused on that. We need to develop the number of staff that we need to deliver more partnerships. We need to continually improve so that we get better at it, and actually we should never rest on our history. And even though history is important, and that we've delivered many thousands of partnerships over the years, you can always do better. It is always possible to do more, and we should never rest on the fact that we've got a fantastic service. There are always things that we can do to make it better.
Pete Osborne, thanks very much indeed, and thanks to the Guide Dogs charity for arranging that. That's, I think, a really important and informative contribution to this podcast, and I hope that guide dog owners feel better informed as a result. I've absolutely no doubt there'll be plenty of comment and observations online and whatever else. But Pete, thanks very much for doing that. As always, now at the end of these podcasts, I'm going to play in its entirety That'll Be the Day by the Liverpool band The Vow.
my inner visions of you. So what if that's a strange thing to do? My heart won't stop bleeding, always needing, it just keeps leading me on. Down through the years, beating the way into your life, yeah, that'll be the day your open invitation comes my way. That'll be the day when all my inhibitions melt away. And who is not to say we'll raise the shallow wreck of yesterday, and I will love you if only I knew how. I've died too many times on this stage by slow hand of impending disgrace. The big wheel keeps turning, but I'm still learning to wind down on the way home. I'm out of the cold, out of the rain, and into your arms. Well, that'll be the day your open invitation comes my way. That'll be the day when all my inhibitions melt away. And who is not to say we'll raise the shallow wreck of yesterday, and I will love you if only I knew how. That'll be the day. That'll be the day. That'll be the day when I will love you if only